Hello everyone, it's Silvia. Welcome back to my channel. Today, by popular demand, we're going to have a look at my top 10 tarot and oracle pairings of all time. Using tarot and oracle decks together has always been a passion of mine, and it doesn't just respond to aesthetics necessities, aesthetic needs, but it's also a way for me to bond a little bit more with a deck. For example, I would think about a deck and I don't really know how to use it, how to integrate it in my practice, and then I will remind myself of an oracle deck that could pair really well. And then I would just use them both together, and all of a sudden everything clicks, everything makes sense. Because it's also true that when you use two decks together, and mind you, it's not necessarily always a tarot and an oracle deck. As a matter of fact, today we're going to have a look at a lot of decks. Most of them are mass market, and the pairings are most of the time between a tarot deck and an oracle deck, but sometimes I actually like to use two oracle decks or two tarot decks together, or one tarot deck and two oracle decks, and so on and so forth. So the combinations are actually infinite. So as I was saying, it's a really good way to look at a tarot deck or an oracle deck you didn't really click with before through a different lens. And by that, I mean that you might be able to use the deck you're pairing it with as some kind of a cathartic tool in order for you to focus on aspects of the deck you haven't bonded with yet that you haven't noticed before. So without going too much into an explanation, and you guys know me, I just always prefer to give you a visual aid. I'm just gonna start showing you the decks that really occupy a very important part of my heart. Some of these are my most cherished decks of all times, and of course it is very important for me to find the right deck to pair them with. That's the reason why I would say these decks, these pairings are the top 10, the 10 best pairings of all times, because they put together some of my most cherished decks with the right deck for a pairing, with the right combination for them. Let's have a look. So one of my most cherished decks of all times is the Murder Occurs Tarot by Corrado Roy. It's a mass market deck, it's been released by Los Carabel a few years ago. This deck is really important for me, first of all because it has been illustrated by Corrado Roy, and as I always say at this point whenever I'm talking about Corrado is an illustrator, and I know him very well because when I was a teenager I used to read Dylan Dog, and so Corrado is actually one of the most popular, most famous illustrators of the Dylan Dog magazines. And so obviously this occupies a very special place in my heart. And so whenever I think about an oracle deck that I want to pair it with, it has to be really important. The pairing, the combo has to look and feel as if it were a match made in heaven. So you have to be very careful, because you also, what I wanted to say is that it is true that sometimes pairing an oracle deck with a tarot deck will facilitate the bonding process, but the contrary is also true. So sometimes it may actually happen that the wrong combination may alienate both those decks. The deck I want to pair it with, and I know that it really works, is the Lubanko Tarot by MJ Collinay. This is also a mass market deck. It has been released by Hay House also a couple of years ago. And let me just show you. I believe that I actually showing this pairing before on my channel. Sometimes when I acquire a new deck, for example, I already have in mind a pairing, and then I do the unboxing of the deck and I just try out the pairing on a whim because I want to check whether I was right or not. And I believe that I actually discovered how well these two go together with you guys, because it was during an unboxing of the Lubanko Oracle. Let me just zoom in. Ironically, there's also another deck that I used in that video, and it's the Raven's Prophecy Tarot. But today I just want to show these two together. Yes, of course, we're talking about crows. So there is that aesthetic element that, you know, it's already telling me that perhaps it's a good idea to pair these two together. But sometimes I just want to show you today, by showing you all of the different decks that I'm pairing together, my purpose is to show you that sometimes aesthetics are just the first step. And you really need to know your decks in order to be able to find the perfect pair. It has to be a deck that you know like the palm of your hand, because you need to understand the vibes. And by understanding the vibes, you actually honor them. You honor your work, your bonding, your practice with these decks. I just love it when, you know, obviously there's crows in all of the cards, but I just really love it when you see the crows kind of mimicking each other when you look at the images on the two decks. It is a very fulfilling experience, may I say, because there's so many of these similarities that you can notice, and you can choose whether it resonates with you or not. And so if it does, you can actually choose to focus on, for example, the keyword that comes from the Oracle deck, and then you expand the meaning of the keyword, or you look for some kind of a geographic location where to look for that specific keyword, thanks to what the message is coming from the tarot cards. I can assure you that this process is incredibly satisfying. It is fulfilling the purpose of using the decks at the most of your abilities, because obviously, as I said before, and I think I've shown you guys also, that sometimes I do try pairings and they don't always work. And I think it's very important to say that, because you need to try things out. You need to listen to your intuition. What does your heart say? What does your soul say? What does your mind, your head, your brain say? And use it and just try it out. And sometimes it will not be working, because not everything works together. But that's the beauty of it, because when you do finally find the tarot deck or the oracle deck that really works together, then it's a really wild ride. Another deck that is very important to me is the Honasa House, and I've chosen the 7th edition to have a look at pairings. And the reason why I've chosen this edition is because the color scheme of this edition gave me the idea for a pairing, and it was with the Universal Folk Oracle. And ever since I tried these two together, let me tell you, it's been absolutely amazing. The messages coming out of these two decks are just really, really spot on and very deep. So let me just show you. As you know, Honasa House, basically she releases a deck, I believe, almost every year, and it might not always be the Honasa House Tarot. It could also be the Stunning Tarot. Like, for example, I believe this year she's only released the Stunning, but she might be working on a new edition of the Honasa House Tarot. Now, the reason why I keep on buying them, basically, it's not just good marketing, but it's also because she actually changes slightly between edition, and it might be a change in format, and it might be a change in colors. And that actually, it doesn't, I know that it doesn't sound like a massive change, but I can assure you 100% that if you actually try the Universal Folk Oracle with any other edition of the Honasa House Tarot, it will not work. So that shows that you really need to know your decks. You really need to know which ones you want to use and how to pair them up. And also, you need to know about aesthetics. And I don't. I'm the first person to admit I know nothing about art, but I do know how to listen to what my heart wants. And so I really strongly believe that when I feel like I want to try a pair of decks together, I should try. I should just don't be scared of making mistakes. You know, that is the #1 rule for writers. Let yourself just write junk. That's what we say. Let yourself write junk, because at first you may believe that it's actual junk. But first of all, even if it were actual junk, you can still work on it and you can still edit it. And let me tell you, if any writer believes at first when they're beginners that they don't need a second draft or a third draft or a fourth draft, etc., they are deluded because it's not true. No matter how good you are at writing, you will always need at least a second draft. And so the first draft, it's okay because you let yourself write whatever comes to your mind. And sometimes maybe it will need editing, but sometimes the idea is right there. And that will definitely give you a little bit of confidence as well. So the same thing happens when you're trying out a pairing. For example, if you're new to tarot and oracle pairings, you might feel like it's a bit of a demanding kind of task and you might give up. But I would say don't give up, don't do that, because everyone can express themselves through these kind of choices. For example, in my case, in this specific pairing, I chose to go with the aesthetics. Then obviously I also noticed that these two pair well together regardless of the aesthetics. The messages and the vibes and the energies of the deck are really good together. But I would have never known if I hadn't tried these two because of the aesthetics. The prompt, my initial idea was because they show similar colors, so let's try them together. And then, you know, this happens and everything clicks, everything falls into the right place. Sometimes a deck will become really important for me because of the specific work that I'm doing with this deck, and that is the case with this deck. This is the Modern Seer Tarot. Now, this deck is unfortunately, it was the reward of a Kickstarter campaign from a few years ago, and it's unfortunately out of print now. And let me tell you, I tried several times to see whether it's still possible to buy it, but even the website that was registered for the Kickstarter campaign has actually been deregistered, and so it is very difficult. It's also because this artist, Christine McGraw, she's actually a paintress, and I don't believe that she's ever done anything other than this deck when it comes to tarot and oracle decks. I could be wrong, and if I am, please let me know in the comments below, because I would be seriously interested to see whether there's other decks that she's illustrated, created, and whether they resonate so much as this one does. So as you can see, it's very minimalist. It's just one or maybe 2 or 3 lines, very, very minimalist. But this is a fantastic style for me, and the fact that it's minimalist also suggests to me the possibility to use my intuition when looking at the card. Obviously, I will always know the meaning of the card because I will base my readings on the RWS. But at the same time, we can also understand, we can just see the intention of the creator, this artist, behind these lines. And I would say the best oracle deck to pair this tarot with is by far the Vessel Oracle. These two together, they would just give you what you need when it comes to a very specific type of work, and I'm talking about body acceptance. So there is something to say about healing and tarot. They go hand in hand, but you need to be very careful in how you do that, what kind of practice you want to do in order to achieve that healing, because not everything works. As a matter of fact, sometimes you will notice that not only there's no healing, there's no advancement, there's no processing, whether it's of grief or trauma, but there's actually a step back. And so you need to be very, very careful about not doing something that is actually negative. I would say that these two together work really well also because they seem to share this kind of minimalist art style. Perhaps the Vessel Oracle does show a few elements more. For example, we see a few colors in the color palette. We see a few lines more, but it still works really, really well. And the reason why I use it for this type of healing, so body acceptance, is because this combo is very gentle, is very kind. I used to use the Modern Seer together with the Reclaim Oracle, and it was too intense. And so when I was using that, it wasn't helping. I love these two decks and I do appreciate the Reclaim Oracle. It is a fantastic Oracle deck, but when used with the Modern Seer, it was just not the right thing. It was just not the right deck. And so when I moved to the Vessel Oracle, everything clicked. Everything started making sense and everything started working really, really well. Unfortunately, as I said, the Modern Seer is out of print and quite difficult to find. But I believe the Vessel Oracle, even though it is an Indeed Oracle deck, it is still in print and you can probably still find it. Another tarot deck that is extremely important for me, and it's also important because for me it represents a victory. So this is the Somnia Tarot, and the reason why I'm saying that is because I actually hesitated to buy this deck for a long time. And the reason was that I suffer from claustrophobia quite badly, and claustrophobia for me is also, it happens when I see someone restrained. And so in this deck, you see that a lot. There's a lot of people, like you see here in this image, covered by a shroud, and on top of everything, if that wasn't enough, there's also some dripping water making them absolutely drenched, which means that this shroud will completely be glued to your skin. And because that's also not enough, Nicholas Bruno, which is the creator of this deck, has thought about putting a rope around the neck of some of these characters. So that is the trifecta for me. For a long, long time, I really tried to stay away from this deck to the point that I was actually switching off. If I was watching a video, for example, and there was a tarot tuber presenting this deck, I was actually switching off. I could not even look at it on Instagram, for example. So it was something that really represented a let's say a trigger for me, because I know that Nicholas Bruno has created this deck with the intention of triggering those feelings that you feel around sleep paralysis. Sleep paralysis is the phenomenon that occurs after you've been sleeping. When you wake up, your mind wakes up before your body does. And so your mind wants your body to respond, perhaps moving your fingers, moving your toes, moving your head, for example. But the body, there is one split second in which the body still hasn't woken up. The muscles haven't woken up. And so the mind conjures up all of these pretty intense images of the reason why you wouldn't be able to move. Perhaps there is someone sitting on your chest, for example, or you are being restrained or something like that. So that is sleep paralysis. There's also a corollary to that. There's other ways in which you can experience sleep paralysis, but mostly it's related to the fact that there is a split second in which the mind might be waking before your muscles do. And that in itself is very scary for me. So if you associate that with the images of characters covered in drenched shrouds and also bound by ropes, you can imagine the level of anxiety that creates in me. However, I've actually learned how to deal with that, and when I bought the deck, I was actually very grateful. And so I actually looked for a long time for a couple of oracle decks that will pair up nicely with this Somnia Tarot. And I found them. So one is actually not an oracle deck, it's called the Wayfarer. So this is a bit of a Miriorama card, that's what it says here, but to me it's just a writer's prompt deck. So if you're a writer, you just pull a couple of these cards and technically that is supposed to get the juices flowing. I never tried this, but you know, it's supposed to work. It doesn't unfortunately have a lot of cards. And so another deck that I want to use with the Somnia Tarot is the Dark Magic Oracle by Fiona Horn, illustrated by Jess Abeya. And this is a mass market deck. This is also a mass market deck. This is unfortunately not. It's an indie deck. And by the way, If you backed the Somnia Tarot Oracle and the remaking of the Somnia Tarot, which was a Kickstarter campaign from last year, I think that Nicholas has sent a couple of updates that, this is going to happen soon, because I've been charged for shipping a couple of days ago. So I'm really keeping my fingers crossed that it comes here before Spooktober, because that will be one of the decks that I will show in the month of October. So the Dark Magic is a mass market deck, but let me just show you these three together and the magic, the actual magic that you can experience. We're just going to put in this case, we're just going to put the tarot in the middle, which is not something that is written in stone. I mean, it's something that if it works for you, then use it, because sometimes it may actually be a bit difficult to understand how to read when you're pairing two decks together. How do you proceed with the reading? Do you read the oracle first? Do you read the tarot first? Do you read the central card first? Do you start from the left and then you go towards the right? How do you do that? Use your intuition. Trust me, there is no better way. Just use your intuition. Now, originally, because this one is so teeny tiny, I would definitely remove more cards from both the tarot and the other oracle deck, but from the lens you cannot really tell that this is a lot less cards, so I'm just going to show you these ones together. So these are really amazing. In this case, how I would read that, I would definitely start from the central card, which means from the tarot card, and that will give me a situation. But sometimes if it's a court card, for example, it will give me an archetype. So I read it the way I would normally read tarot, and then I expand the meaning of the tarot card by looking into the oracle on the left and then also the oracle on the right. For example, we've got the Fool here. So the Fool is telling me that we're looking at something new, a new beginning. And then we're looking at this card that says strength, nurture your diverse talents. And this is basically a very natural progression for the Fool, because when you're a Fool and you embark upon that journey as the hero of your own world, through the other major arcanas, you also need to understand and be very well aware of your own skills. So your strength is coming from nurturing your diverse talents. You're not like anyone else. No one is. We're all different. And so as a consequence of that, we will have qualities, we will have strength, we will have talents, we will have skills that no one else does. And so we need to know them in order to then go out into the world and and try and interact with everyone else. And then looking at this oracle on the right, it says here, follow the guide. And this is very important as well, because it's a Fool. So it's the person that has just started anew. They don't necessarily know how to advance. They know that they need to look into their own skills, but they need a mentor and they need to follow a guide. So as you can see, it's very beautiful. The words really flow. There is this kind of communication that is going on between all of the cards, I would say. We don't have exactly the same style, but these three all are based on photography. And so that kind of helps, I would say, especially the Somnia and the Dark Magic Oracle. But also if you want to use the Somnia just with the Wayfarer, it works really, really well. I would say that this kind of combination, though, it tends to be on the darker side because of the Somnia Tarot and because of, let's say, the inspiration behind the creation of all three of these decks, perhaps a little bit less the Wayfarer. But the Dark Magic is obviously based on something slightly darker. So I would definitely recommend this for very specific type of work. Most likely, shadow work. You can definitely use these three decks together for shadow work. Aesthetically, they are really gorgeous together. The next deck I want to show you is a deck that is very important to me for a number of reasons, but the most relevant one is that this deck actually makes me laugh. So this is the Desert Illumination Tarot. I have the original indie edition, the first edition, which I now don't want to use any longer because that deck, the indie edition, is becoming really hard to find and quite pricey. And so I'm actually always using the mass market edition now, which is actually really good, even though it is based on the second edition of the indie version by Lindsay D. Williams, by the way. This deck makes me laugh. It is one of those decks that really makes me laugh for a number of reasons. There's a number of elements that I find really conducive of a good time, let's put it this way. And I always wanted to find, let's say, a deck, an oracle deck that paired up really nicely with this one, as in, you know, something that will still keep that smile on my face. I don't want to find an oracle deck to pair up with this tarot deck that will make me go sad or something very intense, because that would defeat the purpose of using this deck. You know, that is something that I really want you to be, let's say, comfortable with. If a deck makes you smile, you don't have to use it for divination. If it doesn't work for divination and it just makes you smile, like for example, I would buy decks from Insight Edition simply because I'm a fan of a certain movie or a certain TV show. The Stranger Things deck, for example, tarot deck by Insight Edition, I don't want to use it for divination. It just doesn't work. It's not deep enough. The minors are peepish or slightly peepish. It's a bit of a hit and miss, but I love that TV show. And I bought the deck because I love that TV show. So when you have a deck like this one, for example, I don't know if you consider the Desert Illumination Tarot a deck that will make you smile, but if it does, you don't necessarily have to pair it up with a serious oracle deck because you want it to be a serious practice. Just keep it light. And so that's exactly what I've done. And I'm pairing it with the Cowgirls and Alien Oracle. This is a mass market deck as well, and it's by Rockbull, and let me tell you, it is absolutely fantastic because there's aliens and cowboys in the Desert Illumination Tarot as well. What you can do is literally focus on one or the other element. As you can see here, there's aliens here, and the colors are also quite similar. And so I would say these two together are absolutely fantastic. I really love using them together. What I generally do, I actually look at the oracle deck and determine whether we're talking about a cowgirl or an alien. And then I would look for similarities in either the color or the art style, or also the subject when it comes to the tarot deck. So, for example, this is the Horsewoman. I will use my patience and compassion to overcome obstacles. And so then I compare it to the Hierophant here and to the Queen of Chilies. So it really works because it gives you the possibility to focus on one or another of these aspects. There is something that reminds me a little bit of Men in Black when I use these two together, maybe because of the aliens theme, but it's also really cool because personally I love New Mexico. I've actually been there for a road trip, and my husband and I have been visiting a few places in New Mexico, and this tarot deck but also the oracle deck really give me that kind of vibes. And I really like looking at the cards. As I said, this is something that makes me smile. It's something that even when there's something serious going on, like for example in this card, the Outlaw, I will turn and face the consequences. And you have the 9 of swords or daggers in this case, and the 2 of jugs, so the 2 of cups. Obviously, you need to read it in a certain way. This is not a light-hearted situation. Obviously, you have the 9 of swords, the 9 of air, so obviously that is something very intense. But you're up for it, you're okay with that, you are ready to move on, you have your, I don't know, sonic blasters, I don't even know what these are, but you can defend yourself. And at the end of the day, you will be together with your significant other and you will celebrate drinking moonshine or whatever it is that you're drinking. So as you see, I don't necessarily want to go too deep in these readings because that is not the purpose. The purpose for me is to enjoy these two together, and they're absolutely fantastic. I really love it. And what I love is the fact that there are also decks that don't necessarily pair well with any other deck. So what I mean is that when I look at the Desert Illuminations Tarot, it pairs up nicely just with the Cowgirls and Aliens Oracle, and vice versa. I really cannot think of any tarot deck that pairs up nicely with the Cowgirls and Aliens Oracle other than the Desert Illuminations Tarot. So they are made for each other, and you know, who am I not to, or to separate them? I will never separate them. They should be together because they're absolutely fantastic. Another deck that is becoming increasingly more and more important for me is the Lubanko Tarot. This deck is just amazing, and let me tell you, I don't know why, but I feel closer to the mass market edition than I do to the indie edition. I've had the indie edition for a few years. I bought it pretty much when it was released. And I didn't bond with that deck as much as I do now with this edition, which is by Llewellyn. And by the way, I have no idea why Llewellyn decided to release this deck first in Australia and then in the US, but I'm not complaining. For once that we're actually receiving a deck before the rest of the world, I'm not complaining. Keep it coming. In any case, this deck is gorgeous. I don't know, it does have a different feel. It does have a different vibe for me. I actually picked back up the indie edition because I just wanted to gauge whether it was me that had changed or the actual decks that have different vibes, and I believe they do. At least for me, they work in a different way, let's put it this way. Love the book, by the way, really fantastic. You can do a lot of work with this. And one of the consequences of feeling a different vibe for the mass market edition of this deck is that an oracle deck that I thought would pair really well with the indie edition, and it didn't, now actually pairs up really nicely with the mass market edition. It might be because of the borders and lack of borders. So obviously the indie edition came with borders, whereas the mass market edition does not. So that can actually make a lot of difference. But I'm not entirely sure if that is the case. Is that the reason why these two actually work well together and the indie edition does not? I don't know. But this is the oracle deck I want to pair it with. This is the Flowers of the Night Oracle by Sherilyn Darcy, also a mass market deck by Rockpool. And let me tell you, or let me show you rather, and look at even the backs go really well together. Look at that. It's just really cool. And the only thing that I'm thinking is, okay, because this one is an older release from Rockpool, and it does have that glossier or semi-gloss kind of cardstock, which is different from the cardstock of the Lubanko Tarot, which is very unusual for Llewellyn. It's not your typical Llewellyn cardstock. It's actually very papery. There's also similarity to a couple of, let's say, later publications by Los Carabeos. So I'm wondering whether this is the new trend in cardstock when it comes to publications. I personally like it very much, but it needs to feel sturdy. If it feels papery and easy to damage, then I would be very anxious about using them. But no more about that, and let's just focus on the pairing of these two, because this is really powerful. So let me show you. It's really incredible. These two have a soul, and what happens is that when you use them together, they bear their souls and they just open up this gate, and you can really hear them talking. You can hear the conversation going on. I would say the colors are very similar, and also the art style is similar but not the same, but let's say similar enough that it doesn't crush, and it actually does create this kind of bridge between. You can spot the similarities between the cards. I also really like the, let's say, the component of the oracle deck. So it is Flowers of the Night, so we're looking specifically at those flowers that actually blossom at night. But at the same time, there's other elements to the drawings, the images here. For example, there could be an element like a building in this case, or in this case there's a bat, so there could be an animal. What I like to say is that they are not, so it's not a minimalist style, but you have to agree that it's not a busy card. So the result of that is that you're not forced to spend too much time on the oracle deck because you want to understand all of the elements that are on the image and you try to understand them all. So you don't have to spend too much time on this card, and then you can expand immediately on the tarot cards that are on the side. So for example, we got the understanding here with the Knight blooming Sirius, and on the left we got the Queen of Swords, which is obviously, it works really well with the keyword understanding, because when we're looking at the Queen of Swords, we're looking at the archetype of the judge, but it's also the person that can really understand the difference between right and wrong. And more often than not, you will see that this person chooses to be empathetic. The Queen of Swords doesn't rely on their feelings, but they know their feelings and they can master them and they can choose when to be compassionate. So this is a really strong character for me. It's a very strong archetype. And so I really like to see it together with the keyword understanding. And at the same time, I also like to pair it with the Nine of Cups, which is here. Because there is this sense of, enjoying the moment that comes out of this specific way to represent the Nine of Cups, which is not necessarily something that I agree with. To me, the Nine of Cups doesn't show someone happy. It shows someone that has received, their wish has come true, but now they realize that it wasn't enough. They should have, wished for something to come true together with the community. And so that is the 9 compared to the 10 of Cups, in which you finally understand you have to share what you've received. So it's not necessarily this sense of nonchalance that is in the face of this person and the celebration. At the same time, though, I understand it, because there is also a little bit of a sense of waste here with the liquid just going everywhere. And so there is an approach to the Nine of Cups that is slightly different to what I'm used to, but at the same time, I appreciate it. So it is understanding. It works in this way. Try and understand. Be the Queen of Swords. Don't listen to the bullshit. Look through the black and white, apply your compassion, understand what is actually going on here. This is not a person that is completely understanding what the situation is. They receive their wish, but they also are feeling a little bit awkward. So it works really, really well. As you see, I have been using these two together for a while. Because I was trying to use the Flower of the Night with the indie edition of the Lubanko Tarot, but I really believe that in the mass market edition of the Lubanko, it works so much better than the indie one in this specific case. And I really, really love them. It's just, everything works, everything is being ticked off. The color palette, the art style, really, really fantastic. Using them together is just an incredibly fulfilling experience. And of course, I had to talk about what I believe is my favorite deck of all time. And it's the Savvy Soul Tarot. And I don't think it needs any kind of introduction, because every time I talk about this deck, I explain why I love it so much. And I also say how sorry I am that it's becoming so difficult to find it. Because unfortunately it was just one Kickstarter campaign and that's it. That there was no other reprint of this deck, which is really a pity. It doesn't mean that there will never be a reprinting of this deck. If I can convince Julie to do a reprint, I believe there'll be a lot of people really happy about it. This was a deck that I immediately knew what to pair with, and I never pair it with any other deck ever since, because I really, really love this pairing, and it's with the Outlaw Oracle by Hilary Banks Self. I just absolutely love Hilary, and I also absolutely love this Oracle deck. Because it is the Outlaw Oracle, it does have that kind of bandit kind of vibes, but it's absolutely fantastic to pair it together with this deck, with this tarot deck, because there's so many common elements to these cards. And let me tell you, when I talk about two decks having a conversation together and creating this kind of bridge when you feel that the meaning flows from one card to the other. This one takes that and applies a lot of steroids to that, because it is really, you're looking at two really chatty decks. When you use them by themselves, they will be incredibly chatty. So when you put them together, sometimes it just so happens that when you put two really busy or eloquent decks together, one would just take dominance over the other, and there will be some kind of a, maybe they speak taking turns. These two, they literally just talk to each other all the time. It is unbelievable. Sometimes it is almost difficult to understand what they're saying to each other, because the conversation just does not stop. And one thing that I have to say also is, because the Savvy Soul Tarot is very symbolic, as you can see obviously here, there's something to be said about the calming power, the softening power of the Outlaw Oracle, which I would have never thought I'd say, because obviously we are talking about an Outlaw Oracle, so obviously the themes that are portrayed in these cards are obviously not of a calming nature per se, but then you look at it and it just feels like it asks you to be present in the moment. You know, you look at this and it's the dust bowl, darkness, blackout, oblivion, but the image itself is, it's not dynamic in a way, and it asks you to be present in the moment and just be still. And then you look at the cards on the sides, and for example there's the Eight of Wands, which, you know, it tells you about the speed. And so you need to understand where you're going, because the Eight of Wands, one thing that I always say about the Eight of Wands, yes, it's about the speed, it's about, you're going at 100 miles an hour and you don't necessarily know where you're going, so you don't really have a sense of direction. Or let's say you haven't mapped out every single twist and turn, and so the faster you're going, the more dangerous it becomes, because obviously you can crash. So the Dust Bowl tells you, well, guess what? You have to slow down. You have to slow down, because you're not even able to see in front of you. So just, yeah, Eight of Wands, okay, yeah, go for it, but slow down, take a moment, take a breath, and just understand if this is really where you want to go. And then the Wheel of Fortune, that tells you, you know, everything can go either way. Nothing is fixed, nothing is chiseled in stone yet. And so you do have all of these possibilities still in front of you. You just have to be careful, because right now you don't necessarily see in front of you. So as you can see, there is this dynamic relationship between these two. The cards are just really comfortable with each other. It's probably also because I've been using these two together for a while and many times. It is part of my practice, I would say, not in the last few months, because let's face it, when you have a lot of decks, it's difficult to honor all of them, especially the ones that are very important, like these two for me. But when I do use them, it's almost as if they were you know, old friends coming together after a period of time in which they did not have the possibility to see each other. And so there is this conversation that starts almost as if you know, they just saw each other yesterday. Really loving these two together. Unfortunately, as I said, the Savvy Soul Tarot is really hard to find, but you know, hope never dies, and so I'm really hoping that Julie will consider reprinting this deck. And the Outlaw Oracle is an indie deck, however, it is still available in the shop, and I believe that there's also another Oracle deck that has been released recently, but I'm not entirely sure. But you can check it out. It's and also, let me just say, the Outlaw Oracle's Instagram account is super cool. It is really super cool. Okay, we're just down to 3 combos left, and let's just go with this one. So this is a tarot deck that, again, is very important for me, very close to my heart. But I have to say, it is also one of those decks that if I use it by itself, I kind of get lost in the images. Not because the images are busy, but let me just show you because it's just easier. This is the Remembering the Sweet Fool Tarot by Trisha Murray. Love this deck, absolutely love this deck. what happens is that when I look at the images, if I'm not using it with an oracle deck, I kind of get lost because I want to understand what I'm looking at, and it's not something that is always possible. And it's, you know what, it's not always required. You don't always need to understand what you're looking at, especially if you're using the deck in a different manner. But when you look at the cards, for me, for example, I want to understand, this is the moon card, okay, fine, so this is the moon. And then I look at this and I think, well, these are two birds, and they're probably standing on top of two rocks. There's rocks here as well, there's water here, and then I can't really tell what's going on in the background. So when I look and I see a card like that, it kind of makes me feel like I am missing something. And that's one of the main reasons why I don't tend to use this deck for divination, because I don't think that I will be able, and it's just me, but I don't think that I will be able to form a flowing sentence, as in reading them, you know, just looking at the cards, understanding a message, translating it, and then referring it back to the person I'm reading for. And so I don't want there to be issues. I don't want having to stop and understand what I'm looking at, which is my natural predisposition when I use this deck by itself. However, when I use it with the Death Doula, which is an oracle deck, it's an indie deck. Unfortunately, this combo is both indie decks. However, I do believe that they're both still available. I'm not entirely sure about the Death Doula being still available. Apologies for that, I should have checked. If you do know whether it's still available or not, please let me know in the comments below, as there might be people actually interested in buying it. So when you're looking at these decks, you will see what I mean. It's almost as if the Death Doula worked as a clarifier for the Remembering the Sweet Fool Tarot. So obviously we got the moon and we got the universe here, which is really interesting as a combination, but in the middle you got the shadow. So it's almost as if it were telling me, okay, what do I need to focus on? I need to focus on the shadow side of the moon. And that already, it lights up a light bulb, you know, it just switches on something inside of me, the understanding, the knowledge of how I should interpret this card. Of course, you know, the moon is always about the ebbs and flows of life, and it talks about your inner sense of your inner core self, but also the relationship between what is hidden and what is known, the Azabab and the Sobolo. There's so much to talk about when I talk about the moon card, and therefore when I look at the oracle card, I trust the oracle card to tell me what aspects of the moon I should focus on, and that is the shadow side of the moon. But there's also the universe here, so the oracle card is also telling me to focus on the shadow side of the universe. So I know in this case that I need to do some kind of shadow work. So these two, obviously, as you can see, they may as a consequence be very useful in some kind of intense practice or shadow work, or, you know, inner child. Inner child, yes and no. It is the tarot deck pretty much could be a fool's deck, in the sense that it does say remembering the sweet fool, so it does point to some kind of sense of innocence, innate sense of innocence. But to me, when you pair it up with the Death Doula oracle, it's still a fool, but it's a wise fool. It's not a fool that has started for the first time ever. It's a fool that has already been through the cycle, through the journey, through the major arcanas, and then has started again. So hopefully this fool will make treasure of all the experiences that they have been through before. Really amazing, by the way. Obviously we're looking at very abstract images when it comes to the Death Doula oracle, but that also, you know, it does help. It helps because it's almost as if it were telling me it's okay not to understand everything. It's okay not to stop and look at all of the symbols, all of the elements that are in the card. It's okay to just move on and just take the gist out of it. And the reason why I find that easy to do is because I disciplined myself to just look at the message on the oracle card. So I always look access the dark with the King of Sticks and the King of Points. By the way, 2 kings, very, very powerful. And then we got the visual mantra between the Four of Heels and the Four of Cups, again with this combination of numbers. Numerology is very important as well, and you can use numerology when it's a deck like this, because it's a deck that you don't necessarily have to feel overwhelmed by. You can actually apply different layers of knowledge and interpretation to the cards. So I'm really liking using these two together. Sometimes there's other decks that I like to pair up with these two. But I would say that generally speaking, this is my favorite combo when I'm using the Remembering the Sweet Fool Tarot. There's also the Tree Whisper Oracle by Maggie Black that I really like to use with these other two, but because these are already 2 indie decks, I just didn't want to show another indie deck. And by the way, I don't believe that the Tree Whisper Oracles, the series, because there's 2 or 3 different editions, I don't believe that they're still available. So I don't want to put together too many decks that are too difficult to find. But just for you to know, it does work really well when you use those 3 together. Look at this regeneration between the Ace of Cups and the Four of Points. There's this sense of taking a break now and regenerate your power. It's just really intense and powerful. Another combo that is very functional for me is, let's say it's a combo that lets me appreciate more a tarot deck that initially I had a little bit of trouble bonding with. And this is the Earth Woman Tarot by Tarn Ellis. This is by Los Carabel. And the reason why I had a little bit of trouble appreciating this deck at the beginning at least is because this deck features characters that do not have a face. They have a head, but you don't see the features of the nose, the mouth, and the eyes. And that creates a little bit of a cognitive dissonance, a bit of an unpleasant reaction in me, because I always look for the expression on somebody's face. It is incredibly important for me to understand what the other person is feeling, because then I gauge my own reaction and I know how to respond. When I don't see a face, so you cannot, if there's no mouth, no eyes especially, but also the facial muscles, you don't necessarily see the feelings this person is experiencing at the moment. And so that really creates a little bit of an issue for me. So when I look at the deck, I really want to focus on that. At the beginning, I thought to myself, when I got this deck, I'm going to rehome it. I don't bond with it. I cannot. It's because, I can't see the faces. And but then I thought to myself, okay, if there were faces, and looking at the art style and the components and also the color palette, etc., I was thinking that it reminded me so much of an oracle deck that I had. So this is the Feminine Wisdom Oracle by Leanne Drage. This is both mass market, but this is by Rockpool. And I started using them together, and I realized that the faces on the images on the oracle deck actually helps me get over the issue created by the fact that there's no faces in the tarot. Let me just show you, because it's a lot easier rather than explaining as always. And by the way, these two, other than the faces issue with the tarot deck, are incredibly beautiful, I would say. Even the backs are really beautiful. So I hope that I will be able to explain what I mean, but for example, we have, let's just see this one here. There you go. This is very eloquent, isn't it? It's very symbolic. So we have no faces here, we have no faces here. We've got the Temperance card and the High Priestess. Here, ironically, we have a person that is not looking at us, so we don't necessarily see the face of this person, except that we can, because there is a mirror that has been used, and so we can actually see the face of this person through the mirror. So looking at just these two cards, I already feel anxious, because I don't understand whether they are just completely calm and relaxed, or there's something missing here. But looking at the strength card, I can actually apply the sense of peacefulness that comes out of the face of the person on the strength card, and I can apply that almost as if I were projecting that face onto the missing faces of the tarot cards. I don't know whether that is my brain trying to fix, the lack of faces in the tarot cards. There's something to be said about the brain, the way the brain works. So for example, when you look at a circle that is missing just the last bit, your brain will want it to be a full circle. So it's almost as if you were trying to complete an incomplete image. It is normal, it's natural, it's human. We tend to try and invest our money, between brackets, into the most stable object. And so something that is stable is a circle rather than an open circle, because an open circle is unstable. So there is this sense of looking for the path of least resistance as well. It's totally normal. It's something that happens on a daily basis. We don't even see that anymore. There's a lot to say about completion in colors, for example. Whenever there's a figure that has got 99% coloring and 1% is gray, the brain would tend to associate a color with the gray area as well. Also, computers sometimes do that in, let's say, image recognition, for example. They just, whenever in photography, if there's a part missing, then the computer would just look at the pixels around the missing part and would just try and reproduce that part by imagining the pixel, the most stable combination of pixels that you can imagine in order to fill the void. It's always about choosing something stable as opposed to something unstable. I hope I made myself clear. But in any case, this is something that really happens to me a lot when I use this deck. And it just works. It really does. I am very grateful for the fact that there's faces in all of the characters on the Oracle deck, because this really gives me the possibility to overcome that slight issue that I would have with the tarot deck. And honestly, they are such amazingly beautiful decks that I'm actually really happy that I can use them together, because otherwise I know myself and I know that I would have probably ended up rehoming the tarot deck, especially, obviously not the Oracle deck, because of that issue. And there's so many similarities that can be recognized between the cards. It's just really, really amazing using these two together. It's not just that it lets me appreciate the tarot deck, but it's also that, there's similarities between the color palette, there's similarities between the art style. There is a lot of directionality that can be read between these cards, and it's something that I really like as an exercise. For example, I always try and see where a character is looking, if they're looking towards one side or the other. For example, in this case, the Seven of Wands, the character here is clearly looking towards the Romance card, so there might be some kind of issue in your love life and you need to stand up for yourself, this seems to be saying. But it's also the Moon, so there's obviously ups and downs. So there is, there's many ways to read a combo, so when you're using these kind of pairings. But I would say whatever works best for you, that is the best way to read them, to read the cards. Because obviously you need to keep on going, you need to look at the cards and you need to understand the message, you need to relay back. And reading is not always easy. Always remember this: if a tarot and oracle combination is making the reading not easier but even more difficult, it's wrong. It's just, it could be the same creator, it could be the same art style, it could be the same things, the same color palette. But if it makes reading the message more difficult rather than easier, then it's the wrong combo, for sure. And last but not least, in this case, I'm actually gonna start with the Oracle and not the Tarot deck. And the reason why I'm doing that is because it's about this Oracle deck, which is actually really cool. I honestly wouldn't have thought that I would have liked another collage deck so much as I do, because I lately tend to stay away from collage decks because I feel a bit overwhelmed by the number of collage decks that I've got in my collection, whether it's tarot deck or oracle decks, it doesn't really matter. It feels like every other deck recently has been a collage deck. And so when I actually saw it, I felt like, and I bought it out of a Facebook group, and I thought to myself, did I make a mistake? Am I going to have to rehome it? Because I was using it by itself, but I knew that there was a lot going on within these cards, and so I really wanted to find the right tarot deck to use in order to be able to see whether I wanted to keep it or not, and I think I found it. It's the Rosebud Tarot. The Rosebud Tarot is really cool. I actually really like it. I know that I say that about a lot of decks, but there's something to be said about having a million collage decks and one of them actually standing out. It means that it's doing something right, otherwise it wouldn't stand out. This one does more than one thing right, and I really appreciate the fact that because of the validity of the message of these cards, I actually can keep the Quiet Rebel Oracle, because these two work really, really well together. By the way, this one works really well with the Hour Tarot as well, but I just wanted to show you the Rosebud. And there's something to be said about choosing to just gray out the characters, the main character, let's say, of the images on the cards. Between these two decks, you will see that this is a common choice. This is also a common choice on other decks as well, but it works really well here because it does create this bond, it creates this link between the cards, and it just really works. And let me tell you, I really appreciate this. I will never stop saying that, because the Quiet Rebel has an incredibly powerful soul. It is a sassy deck. It's a very chatty and sassy deck. You cannot shush it because it will keep on talking. And I really appreciate the fact that now I can use it, because with the tarot deck, you know, it creates this sort of bond and it works really well. So, you know, move like water, fluidity between the Seven of Earth and the generosity of Earth. This is telling me about balance. It talks about the fact that the earth is very grounded. Sometimes the risk is to be too grounded, so there needs to be some kind of fluidity, and one way of acquiring that fluidity is to focus on a different alchemical elements such as water. Water and earth are really good together. So there's all these little things that actually work really well, that give me the possibility to dive deeper into the meaning of the cards and also the images themselves. And I think that's just really great. So the great hump, sorry, I always like, sometimes I really chuckle and I can't even read the title on these cards because it is really sassy. So the great unplug, detachment. This is such a direct message. You really cannot misunderstand the message here. So the great unplug, detachment, you know, just pulling the plug out of the socket. And there's the Ten of Earth and the curiosity of water, again with this alchemical balance between earth and water, but also, you know, detachment, which is clearly air. So there is this kind of complex relationship between these cards. The art of disappearing, retreat between the generosity of water and the two of water, and so on and so forth. I cannot tell you how beautiful the messages are, but most of all, they're actually really direct. Like, this deck doesn't pull any punches, and you don't want it to, because sometimes we need to hear, you know, things as they are, and sometimes it may hurt or it may be shocking. outrageous, but at the end of the day, it is something that we need to hear. So shying away doesn't really help, because it will come back and bite you. So I highly recommend this too. The Quiet Rebel is not a mass market deck, it's an indie deck. It's the reward for a Kickstarter campaign. There's also a Quiet Rebel tarot that I haven't seen yet, but I'm very curious. And the Rosebud tarot is actually mass market, even though there was an indie edition in linen that was really cool, you know, originally. So these are my favorite pairings between tarot and oracle decks of all times. I do pairings every day, so there's literally hundreds more, but I wanted to show you my top 10. What did you think about these pairings? Let me know in the comments below, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you the next time. Bye!